Hey everyone, now that you understand complex sentences, let's zoom in on the different types of dependent clauses that make them work. Here's the key idea. Dependent clauses aren't all the same. Each type has a specific job in a sentence. In this video, we're going to cover three main types: relative clauses, complement clauses, and adverbial clauses. And then we'll look at how clauses can be stacked inside each other, what we call embedded structures. By the end, you'll be able to spot these clauses in real writing and use them effectively in your own. Let's start with relative clauses. A relative clause is a type of dependent clause that describes a noun. They usually start with relative pronouns, words like who, which, that, whose, or whom. And as I said, they usually tell us more about a noun or noun phrase in the sentence. For example, the student who studied hardest passed the exam. Here, in this example, who studied hardest gives us more detail about the student. So who studied hardest is a relative clause inside this sentence. There are two types of relative clauses, restrictive and non-restrictive, and we'll cover the distinction between those in the video that follows this one on punctuation. But for now, just know that restrictive clauses are essential to the meaning of the sentence. You don't use commas when you use restrictive clauses. However, non-restrictive clauses add extra information that isn't essential, so you set those off with commas. Just a reminder, relative clauses act as modifiers on nouns. That's going to help you distinguish this type of clause from the other dependent clause types that we're covering ahead. Next up are complement clauses. First, a quick note, it's complement with an E, not complement with an I, like when you say nice shoes. A complement clause is a clause that completes the meaning of something else, usually a verb. Think of it as a noun-like unit that answers the question what or who in relation to the verb. They're often introduced by words like that, if, whether, or WH words such as what, who, or how. Now, complement clauses can function as subjects or objects in a sentence. They act like nouns. They're noun-like units that either do the action or receive it. Understanding this helps you see how complex sentences are structured. So first, let's look at complement clauses as objects. Most complement clauses appear as objects. Let's look at some examples. I think that she is right. Here, that she is right is the object of the verb think. Ask yourself, what am I thinking? The answer is that she is right. Another example, she asked whether he was coming. In this case, whether he was coming is the object of asked. Ask yourself, what did she ask? Well, the answer is whether he was coming. A quick tip, you can replace the complement clause with a pronoun like it. For example, I think it, or she asked it. And doing this will help you see that the entire clause is one unit acting like a noun. Now, complement clauses also act as subjects, and these are less common, but they work the same way. So for example, what she said surprised me. Here, what she said is the subject of surprised. And you want to ask yourself who or what is doing the surprising. The answer is what she said. Again, you can replace the clause with a pronoun. It surprised me. And this shows how the clause is a single unit performing the action. So how to spot complement clauses? I like to highlight this because I feel like it's a little more complicated. They usually start, again, with words like that, if, whether, what, who, how, why, or when. Everything from that first word to the end of the clause is one unit. And ask yourself, does this clause answer what or who in relation to the verb? If yes, it's likely a complement clause. Then ask, is it doing the action or is it receiving it? So is it a subject or an object? And understanding these boundaries is important because it clarifies meaning, preventing ambiguity, and helps your writing sound precise and professional. So remember, whether as a subject or object, a complement clause acts like a single noun unit in your sentence. Finally, we have adverbial clauses. These act like, no surprise, adverbs. They modify verbs, adjectives, or even other adverbs. They usually answer questions like when, why, how, under what condition, or for what purpose. They often start with subordinating conjunctions like because, although, when, if, since, while, or unless. Adverbial clauses can be classified by the type of information they provide. So here are the main types you should know. First, there's time, which tells us when something happens. For example, I'll call you when I get home. Next is reason or cause, right? Explains why something happens. Example, I stayed home because it was raining. Contrast and concession shows contrast or unexpected results. For example, although it was raining, we went out. Condition, which indicates under what conditions something happens. For example, if you practice every day, you will improve quickly. And finally, purpose explains for what purpose something happens. So she whispered so that she wouldn't wake the baby. And now that we know the different types of dependent clauses, let's see how they can be stacked inside one another to make sentences even more complex and nuanced. Sometimes clauses can be nestled inside other clauses, and we call these embedded structures. In other words, a clause can contain another clause inside of it, creating layers of information. For example, the book that you said was missing is here. Let's break this down. The main clause, the independent clause, is the book is here. Inside it, we have a relative clause that you said was missing. And inside that relative clause, there's another clause, was missing. So there's one clause inside another, which is why it's called embedded. This kind of structure shows up in academic and formal writing because it lets writers pack in a lot of detail. But they can also make sentences hard to read or lead to grammatical issues if the clauses are misplaced or dangling, and we're going to cover that in a video that's coming up. So that wraps up what we're going to cover about dependent clause types and embedded structures. Remember, relative clauses describe nouns, complement clauses complete verbs or ideas, adverbial clauses give extra information about actions, embedded clauses add depth. Keep an eye out for these clauses when you read and try using them in your own writing. They'll make your sentences clearer, stronger, and more connected.